It's the 2022 World Cup. It's the squad update for Brazil. Hello and welcome to the International Soccer Preview by Soccerphiles Canada. I'm Kevin.
And I'm Connor, and today we will be updating Brazil's squad for the 2022 World Cup.
Yes, we've done a podcast on the groups, which took a close look at Brazil's team, as well as a player media cast, which went through each candidate for making the final squad, and that ended with a prediction of the starters.
So this media cast is an addendum to that. In other words, we won't be repeating all of that information, but we'll simply be adding on to it. It's not necessary to listen to that first player version, but the conclusions we draw here are explained in more detail there. We recommend the full player podcast, but if we have time, we are hoping to release a player version focused solely on the final squad.
Right, and the final squad has been released for most of the teams, and a preliminary squad too. Today we'll find out how accurate we were in our predictions. We're going to list the names of the candidates that we consider definite, likely, and possible, and then announce who made the final squad in the case of Brazil, because they didn't release a preliminary squad.
As we guessed, most squads had a few surprises, players who didn't make it, and new or unexpected players who did. But we'll go over those players and summarize them again at the end.
Right, and we'll also discuss whether the selections and games played since June 2022 have changed our thoughts on our predicted starters and on the team's progress or prospects in the Cup. So let's begin. Oh, I am wearing a Brazil shirt. I finally have a shirt of one of the teams we're doing. I'm so happy about that.
That's good. Well, I don't have Brazil. I don't even have yellow. I'm going blue, which is kind of a sad mimic of their backup jersey.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, well, let's go to formations. And again, we won't repeat all of the formations from the 2021 Copa America. We will put a graphic up for YouTube viewers that shows that, but we're more focused on the September games. And do you want to take us through those September games, Connor?
Yeah. So they're they played two games in September. Both in France against Ghana and Tunisia. They went with a 4-3-3 in their first and a 4-2-3-1 in the second. So both in Copa America and World Cup qualifying, Brazil used both of those formations. A couple others, but those were their two primary ones. So trying out one of each in those two games shows they're perhaps not fully decided on which way they're going to go.
Yeah, I think they used the 4-2-3-1 a little bit more than the 4-3-3. We might also see a 4-4-2 in the Cup, but we didn't in those September friendlies. So keep that in mind as we go through those September games, because we'll be talking about who played those games, the 4-3-3 against Ghana and the 4-2-3-1 against Tunisia. Okay, now we are ready to move on to the squad, and we will begin with the manager.
Yeah, Tite has been the Brazilian manager since 2016, and he will lead them into this World Cup.
Right, so he is he made the final squad, as it were. Okay, now for the other positions, we're going to start just by mentioning the names and where we had them in terms of their likelihood of reaching the squad, and then we will go over who made it, and finally a little summary of the September friendlies. So take it away, Connor.
Yeah, so in our definite category for goalkeepers, we had Liverpool goalkeeper Alisson as our only definite candidate. For likely, we had 35-year-old Palmeiras keeper Weverton, and as well Manchester City goalkeeper Ederson.
Right, so we're maybe we'll do the possible ones just by name, and we'll drop the other ones.
Yeah, and then we had two possible candidates. That was Everson and Santos.
Okay. And yeah, pretty obvious there. The players who made it were the definite candidate Allison or Alison Becker, and the likely candidate Weverton, and the likely candidate Ederson. So no surprises there. And in the September friendlies, well, prior to September, it had been mostly Allison, about 2/3 of the time since the 2021 Copa America. And it was Allison, too, who started both of the September friendlies. So we'll come back to that when we predict the starters at the end. But we are swiftly moving on to the defenders.
Yeah, so we had one definite candidate for central defenders, and that was PSG forward Marquinhos. And then we had two likely candidates. So the first is 38-year-old Chelsea defender Thiago Silva, still going after 109 caps.
Yeah.
And then we also have Real Madrid youngster Eder Militao. And then in possible candidates, we had two. We had Lucas Verissimo and Gabriel, who plays for Arsenal.
Okay, and I have a new one to add here. So on the final roster, a new candidate, but maybe I'll just mention the ones who made it first. So Marquinhos, our definite candidate, is on the squad, as is Thiago Silva. He's actually captain of the squad again, and Eder Militao also making the squad. So again, no surprises, except perhaps this new candidate, Bremer. Do you want to tell us about Gleison Bremer?
Yeah, so he plays with Juventus in Italy, having previously played with their city rivals Torino. And he's 25-year-old central defender, just one cap, which his first cap came in September 2022.
Okay, and he got his first cap, in September 2022. He was actually out with a muscle injury from October 21st, and I may have to look into that. I don't think he's been replaced on the squad, so maybe they're hoping he'll recover, but we'll maybe come back with more information on that at the end. All right, so 4 central defenders, and we'll get rid of the ones who were possible but unlikely, and move on to left. Oh, sorry, I got to summarize the position and the September game. So always for Brazil, it's 4 at the back, so 2 central defenders, and probably or it's Silva and Marquinhos most of the time, though Militao may get a start. And it was Silva and Marquinhos starting in the September friendlies. So I think we'll expect to see them. Militao sometimes does play as a right back or a left back, so I think he kind of fills in those positions a little bit. Bremer probably a substitute, don't you think?
Yeah, not very experienced, but we'll maybe get some experience. But yeah, I'm not sure he'll displace the kind of stalwarts that Brazil has there right now.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, well, let's move on to left backs.
All right, so we didn't have any definite candidates in our left back position, but we did identify one likely, and that was Alexandro. That's 2 words, Alexandro. He plays for Juventus. And then for possible candidates, we had Guilherme Arana, who plays with Atlético Mineiro in Brazil, as well Manchester United left back Alex Telles.
Okay, so we'll drop Renan Lodi, a possible but unlikely candidate, although Lodi actually did come back for the September games on the bench there, but didn't make the final squad. On the other hand, Alexandro did make the squad. Guilherme Arana was injured on September 17th and still out with injury at the time of the squad. So whether it was non-selection or injury, we can't be sure, but regardless, the injury kept him out. It's a cruciate ligament injury with an unknown return date. So kind of by default, Alex Telles makes the squad there. And in summary, Alexandro had actually seemed to be the starter in the period following the 2021 Copa America, but Alex Telles was making inroads with some starts, and he continued that in the September friendlies by starting both of them. But we should note that Alexandro was off the squad in the September friendlies with a thigh problem, but he's recovered from that since. So maybe sharing the position. Again, we'll come back to it when we talk about possible starters. Let's move on to right backs.
Yeah, so we had, again, no definites, but two likely candidates. The first is Dani Alves. He's a 39-year-old with 123 caps, once at Barcelona, now playing in Mexico. And then we also had Juventus defender Danilo. We also had one possible candidate, and that was Tottenham's Emerson Royal.
Okay, and the players who made the squad were the two likely candidates, Danilo and Dani Alves. And it had been primarily Danilo since the 2021 Copa America, but Dani Alves was making some inroads towards the end as a starter. Central defender Eder Militao started as the right back in the first of the September friendlies, and Danilo was the starter in the second. Dani Alves was actually off the squad for both of those games, but the selection for the final squad came after that, so he is back in. Okay, we move on to the midfield, and we're going to cover defensive midfielders and central midfielders together. So we'll go through the candidates and then summarize that central midfield position.
Yeah, so starting with defensive midfielders, we identified a definite candidate in Manchester United's Casemiro, and a likely candidate in Liverpool's Fabinho.
Wow, what a selection they have to choose from, hey?
Yeah, and we'll continue actually going on to the central midfielders. They had Casemiro's Man United teammate Fred. We identified him as definite. We identified two possible candidates in Marseille's Gerson, and also in Newcastle's Bruno Guimaraes. And then, and that's it. Sorry, those were two possible candidates, Gerson and Bruno Guimaraes.
Right, and we had possible but unlikely Arthur Melo. He was out for surgery since October and still not back. So if he was ever a candidate, that pretty much ruled him out. So we will drop those candidates from our list and look at who made the squad. So again, pretty predictable here. Casemiro selected. Fabinho selected also. So both defensive midfielders. And Fred also selected. And not Gerson, but the other possible candidate, Bruno Guimaraes. I guess his good performances at Newcastle were recognized.
Yeah, only 8 caps, but having a fabulous domestic season.
Mm-hmm. So in summary of the position and September friendlies, usually it was one at the back, but sometimes two. And generally it was Casemiro playing when it was one central or defensive midfielder. And he was partnered with Fred when it was two. All of that since the 2021 Copa America. A few other players had been tried out, but it returned to Fred and Casemiro, who started the September friendlies, actually started one of them. And in the case of the 4-3-3 formation, it was Casemiro alone in the middle. So there we have it. You can pretty much guess what we're going to say for the final predictions there. But here we move on to left midfielders. And actually, since we don't have anyone coded as a left midfielder, we're going to kind of use this space to introduce Lucas Paqueta, who's really more of a versatile or a roving midfielder.
Yeah, so he is now with West Ham. Lucas Paqueta has 35 caps for Brazil, 25 years old.
Right, and he's coming off a minor injury, but he's back in action, so they kind of avoided injury there. And in the September friendlies, the left midfielder, in general, the left midfielder position is only used sometimes, and that was illustrated in the September friendlies where it was only used in one of the two games. And actually, when it's used, it's filled by various players, including Lucas Paqueta. But in the September friendlies, it was Neymar playing the role in the first of those two games.
Yeah, and to confirm, we did have Paqueta as a definite player to make the squad.
Oh yes, and I forgot to highlight him too.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we're all square now, and we can move on to the right midfielders.
Yeah, so we didn't have any definite likely or possible, but I'll just mention possible but unlikely Everton Ribeiro, who plays for Flamengo.
Yes, because surprisingly, he was selected. We did have him, as Connor said, as possible but unlikely, having started only two of their games since the 2021 Copa America, and he was subbed in for three and on the bench for three, but he hadn't been selected for the last four matches. So maybe possible but unlikely was a bit harsh of us, and maybe possible. But again, missing 4 games in the lead up to the Cup is always a bit of a concern. Anyway, he is nevertheless selected, and we will drop Willian, one of my favourites there, Connor, but he's retired from Brazil.
All right.
Yeah, and in summary, like the left midfield position, the position's not often used, and generally it's a central midfielder or attacking midfielder filling the position at the odd time that it is used. So Ribeiro probably not going to be a starter there. Okay, let's move on to left wing and left attacking midfielders. We've kind of combined the position because it's usually the same set of players playing both.
Yeah, so we identified one definite candidate, and that's Real Madrid's 22-year-old Vinicius Jr. We had identified Richarlison as likely, but we're actually going to talk about him in the forwards when we get there, so we'll move him for now. And then we had one possible candidate in Gabriel Martinelli.
Okay, so yes, and Vinicius Jr. has made the squad, as had Gabriel Martinelli. As Connor said, we'll deal with Richarlison when we talk about forwards. But there's so much competition for this spot with not only Martinelli and Vinicius Jr. competing for the spot, but also the roving midfielder Paqueta sometimes end up there, and Richarlison too is kind of a candidate for this position. So the September friendly saw Vinicius Jr. as a left forward in the first game, and then Paqueta as a left attacking midfielder in the second. So yeah, a lot of candidates here. We may see a bit of mixing and matching. And okay, let us continue on with the right wingers. Do you want to take us through the candidates?
Yeah, so first is Manchester United youngster Anthony. We identified him as definite, as we did Rafinha, now with Barcelona. We didn't have any likely candidates, but one in the possible category, and that's Real Madrid's 21-year-old right winger Rodrigo.
Okay, well, all three of them have made it, but I have another note on Anthony. So Anthony, Rafinha, the two definite candidates, have made it, and also possible candidate Rodrigo. But Anthony picked up an injury very recently. It's an unknown, so that would be kind of, well, now is November 10th, and I think it was within the last couple of days. So it's an unknown injury with an unknown return date. That's what my main source says. However, another source describes it as a knock and has him returning soon. So by that account, it doesn't threaten his World Cup participation here. but yeah, we may have to kind of keep an eye on that. In terms of the position, it's again very competitive on the right side, but unlike the left, Rafinha has increasingly taken command of the spot. However, Anthony did make some inroads towards the end. The September friendly saw Rafinha playing the position both times, once as a right forward and once as a right attacking midfielder. And on we go to forwards, and we include attacking midfielders in the forward line.
Yeah, just one name to mention here, and that's Philippe Coutinho. We considered him likely to make the squad, of course, now with Aston Villa.
Yes, we did consider him likely. However, he did not make the squad. So I'm going to highlight that in red as a bit of a surprise. I mean, by our own accounting, we had him as likely because he had been injured for most of the time after the Copa America there, but he came back in November 2021 to start 3 of their remaining 8 games, and he was subbed in for 2 and on the bench for 3. So despite kind of not great form in his club play, he was consistently being selected for Brazil. So we kind of had to quote him as a likely candidate, but I was always a bit doubtful about that. How about you, Connor?
Yeah, I think there's so much competition for Brazil. We mentioned some possible candidates like Gabriel Martinelli and Bruno Guimaraes playing very well. So I think Brazil has the luxury to kind of pick on form, and it seems like that's what they've done here.
Yeah. He did actually pick up a hamstring injury, kind of like Anthony, this week in early November. However, the selection was before that, so we'd have to say he was a non-selection rather than the injury having played a role in that. So in terms of the position, and we're generally thinking of central attacking midfielder, here it's used only in the 4-2-3-1 formation, which they do use often enough. Usually it was Firmino or the roving midfielder Paqueta or Neymar. However, it was really never Coutinho who played other positions in the few starts that he got. So they did use this position of central attacking midfielder once in the September friendlies, and it was Neymar who filled the position for that game. However, Neymar is generally a forward, so we have him in the next section, which is the forwards. And let's look at the candidates here.
Yeah, so Neymar we consider definite to make the squad. He has 121 caps at 30 years old, so quite impressive.
Wow.
We had some likely candidates as well, beginning with Richarlison, who we moved from left wing. We have him as likely. We also had Atletico Madrid forward Matheus Cunha and Arsenal's Gabriel Jesus. And then we had one possible, and that was Gabriel Barbosa, who plays in Brazil with Flamengo.
All right. Well, now we'll announce who made it, and certainly no surprise that Neymar was selected. Richarlison, also no surprise there, but a bit of a surprise with Matheus Cunha not being selected. He had only started 3 of their 13 games since the 2021 Copa America, but he had been subbed in for 4 and on the bench for 1. And when he wasn't selected, it was due to injury. I don't believe it's injury here that is keeping him out of the squad, rather a non-selection, but a bit of a mild surprise there. However, Gabriel Jesus it was selected, and Gabriel Barbosa was not. But we do have one new candidate here, and that is Pedro. So we'll get rid of the ones who didn't make it, which includes actually Firmino, which some people were surprised by his non-selection. But to that, I can only say that perhaps following him at Liverpool and not following his progress as closely on the Brazilian squad, because he hasn't appeared for the national team since the 2021 Copa America. So not really a surprise to us. But let's take a look at the new player who was selected, Pedro.
Yeah, he's a 25-year-old who plays with Flamengo in Brazil. He actually had a spell with Fiorentina in Italy, but has returned back to his native Brazil. So yeah, a newcomer to the squad. Yeah, maybe you want to talk about his recent participation.
Yeah, not as much a newcomer as all that. He did return actually after an almost 2-year absence. I think that was just maybe one cap in 2020. And after the 2-year absence, he returned in September 2022. So for the September games, he didn't start either of those 2 games, but he was subbed in for one and on the bench for the other. So good for him breaking into such a difficult squad. And
Yeah.
we'll finish by just summarizing the position over time and the September friendly. So we noted in the formations that it can be a 1-man, 2-man, or 3-man forward line, and it was a 3-man forward line in game 1 of the September friendlies, and then a lone striker in game 2. So the outside forwards of that 3-man forward line we've already met. Generally, we look at the left and right attacking midfielders, Vinicius Junior and Rafinha. They played the outside roles, and it was Richarlison who was a centre forward in both of the games. Neymar actually played as a midfielder in both of those September games. So that really illustrates some of the fluidity that we see, especially in the front line of Brazil, players kind of switching around much more so than in the back. All right, well, that brings us to the end of the kind of player by player, and we now know the final squad. So we can look at some statistics just based on that final squad of 26 players. And do you want to take us through those, Connor?
Yeah, so the average age of the Brazil squad is 27.4 years, which I would say is probably average for a lot of squads.
I'd say, we are seeing that. I feel 27 used to be kind of on the older side, but when we did the main podcast, we saw that 27 was a lot of teams were around 27. I'd say this is slightly older, but Brazil is always picking its best players. So
yeah, and obviously that will be brought up by the inclusion of a 38 and a 39-year-old in Thiago Silva and Dani Alves. So they probably skew it upwards, you would have to say.
Yeah, but I mean, when we've talked about some teams that are like Costa Rica and perhaps Croatia that are reliant on these older players, so reluctant to let them go. In Brazil's case, it's because these players are winning their spots over very talented younger players. So it's certainly not a strike against them, hey?
Yeah, I agree. That's a very good point. In terms of average caps, it's 36.5 for Brazil.
I don't think there's a lot to talk about it there. If they are bringing kind of slightly older players, they're bringing more experience with them. But this isn't out of the range. It's kind of in range.
Yeah. Total goals for the Brazil team is 161. And actually, Neymar himself contributes 75 of those.
Well, that's amazing. Yeah, we need to really compare this to other teams to make sense of it. But I can assure you this is a stunning number of goals.
And in terms of goals per cap, the ratio is almost 17%, 16.9, which is pretty high. Some individual players like Neymar are about 62%. That's how many goals they score per cap. So 16.9, I would assume also would be a bit on the higher end.
Absolutely. When we did with a full podcast, we found now we were kind of comparing all the recent candidates for the players, but an average of 13.1%. So the range was basically from about 10 to, I would say, about 15% on average. So Brazil might have been the very highest team.
Yeah, that would really surprise me.
Yeah, way above average. All right, well, let's move on to a few summaries then. And we're going to begin with just a review by name of players who were not selected.
Yeah, there was two players we considered likely to make the squad and didn't. That was Philippe Coutinho and Mateus Cunha.
All right, and we won't go into further detail, but if you want more detail on them, the full podcast gave the bio. How about new players?
Yeah, and there's two new players. We did discuss them previously, but the two names are Bremer, or Gleason Bremer, as he may go by, and Pedro.
All right, using orange to indicate the new players. And just in case you're watching the YouTube podcast, black, if their name is in black, it means they played in a major tournament. And if it's in gray, it means they haven't. Okay, and then let's do a quick run through of injuries, but we have a few categories here that we're kind of dividing them into. So players who have recovered from injury, players who remain in injury doubt, players who have been dropped due to injury, and finally, players who were injured but they were never a strong candidate to begin with.
Yeah, so one player who seems to have recovered from his injury is Anthony. As we said, we're not 100% certain on that, but we believe it may just be a knock. We don't have any lingering injury doubts or people who've been dropped due to injuries, though there are a few names people who were injured but weren't really strong candidates. That included central defender Leo Ortiz, who we considered possible but unlikely. It included possible candidate Guillermo Arana, who we mentioned, and also possible but unlikely kind of versatile or more defensive midfielder Arthur Melo.
Okay, well, let's do a run through of the players and our final predictions. We'll kind of do that by reviewing the predictions we made before and any changes we feel. So do you want to kind of run through the squad, and I'll talk about the predictions we made?
Yeah, so Tite is still the manager, so no change there.
Yeah, I'm gonna say he's a starter.
Great. And then for goalkeepers, we had Alison Becker, Weverton, and Ederson.
Right, and we had nominated Allison as the starter, and he started both September friendlies, which just reinforced our opinion. So we are sticking with Allison as the starter.
All right. For central defenders, we have Marquinhos, Eder Militao, Thiago Silva, and newcomer Bremer.
Right, and we had nominated Silva and Marquinhos as the starters. And even though a couple of players were kind of tried out, we are sticking with Marquinhos and Thiago Silva as the starters. We should actually get rid of the candidates who didn't make it there.
Yeah. All right. For left back, we have Alexandro and Alex Tellez.
Right, and this one's a bit longer. We initially nominated Alex Sandro as the starter, but we had some hesitancy about it. And actually, we might have hesitated more because Alex Tellez actually was making inroads, and he continued to do so by playing the September friendlies, although Alexandro was out with a minor injury. So at this point, we're going to hedge our bets by marking both of them in yellow, and that means it could be a rotation or it could be either one. Any opinion on rotation or a starter there, Connor?
Yeah, tough to say. Perhaps Sandro if he's fit, but yeah, I think your rotation is quite possible.
Yeah. All right.
All right. For right backs, we had Danilo and Dani Alves.
Right, and we stick with Danilo here, but given that Dani Alves was selected, we wouldn't be surprised if he did get a start, but we're putting our bet on Danilo there.
Great. So for defensive and central midfielders, we have Casemiro, Fabinho, Fred, and Bruno Guimaraes.
That's right, and we'll get rid of the player who wasn't selected. And we had nominated in the previous podcast Fred and Casemiro as the starters, and the September friendlies kind of reinforced our prediction there. So Casemiro and Fred.
All right. Moving on to versatile midfielders, we have Lucas Paqueta.
Right. Well, we just put him on the left midfielders because there were no other candidates there, and we saw Lucas Paqueta as a starter, although it could be in any of several positions. So actually, true to that, he started as a right midfielder and then as a left attacking midfielder over the 2 September friendlies. So that reaffirmed our predictions of him as a starter somewhere on the field at least.
Yeah, for right midfielders, Everton Ribeiro, we thought he was possible but unlikely, but he did make the squad. What do you think about him starting?
I would say no. I think if he sees any action at all, it'll be as a sub. He barely made the squad in the first place. He saw only 11 minutes over the September friendlies, so not a starter for me.
All right. In left wingers, we have two. We have Vinicius Jr. and Gabriel Martinelli.
Right, and we said Vinicius Jr. and actually Richarlison, who we moved to forward here, was sharing the spot, and I think that's where we left off in our previous podcast. But increasingly, we're leaning further towards Vinicius Jr. Not really enough to nominate him as a starter, although we think he'll get some starts, but we think others will get some starts. But the others will more likely be Richarlison or Neymar. I see Martinelli as a substitute, perhaps getting a starting position if he earns his way into it. So just Vicinius Jr. as a sometime starter.
Yeah. On the right wing, it's a little bit more crowded. We have Antony, Rafinha, and also Rodrigo.
Right, and even though the candidates are more crowded, this one was a bit more clear. Actually, in the previous podcast, we hedged a bit, giving a yellow highlight to both Rafinha and Antony. But given that Rafinha played both September friendlies, we're now viewing him as the starter. But we wouldn't be surprised if Antony did get a start. In there. So. In fact, we think he will get a start or two, so we're going to code him as a yellow sometime starter.
Yeah. All right, for forwards, so we don't have any attacking midfielders, but for forwards, Brazil are bringing Neymar, Richarlison, Gabriel Jesus, and Pedro.
That's right. And of course, Neymar we're seeing as a starter, though not necessarily as a forward. He sometimes plays in the midfield. And we see Richarlison and Jesus both getting at least a start. So we're going to code them in yellow as sometimes starters. And that's the same conclusion we came to in the previous podcast. All right, so there we have it. We'll have to wait until the World Cup to see if we've hit the nail on the head. But how did we do, Connor, from the previous podcast to this one in terms of predicting the selection?
I think we did quite well. I think Brazil didn't pull that many surprises in terms of omissions or additions. But really, we saw Brazil as being, kind of having a smaller squad of players. They basically went with who we thought would be definite or likely, and we only saw a few positions that kind of remained to be filled. And really, there was, like I said, not many surprises from Brazil. They went with the people who they've been relying on since the Copa America.
Yeah, they certainly made it easy for us. They didn't bring in a lot of new players for consideration, and they've gone with the same players. There may be some rotation up at the top there, but it's kind of the same cast of characters. Does the selection that you see here change your opinion about their chances?
No, I mean, I see them as one of the favorites. They've got just an incredibly strong team, great depth. Really, they can change their starters and not get a lot weaker. So it just reinforces, I think, going through the list, just what star power Brazil has.
I agree. I mean, I think there are players left off the squad here, maybe even who don't even get onto the squad for a tryout that would be stars on any other team. So just the depth of talent they have is just amazing.
Yeah, Roberto Firmino, one example.
Yeah. Yeah. And also for me, as we said in the podcast, they seem a bit more kind of sober and mature and more intent on this. We talked about them not really having any huge egos on the squad, disrupting things. And what do you make of that?
Yeah, I think the fact that even they're sticking with kind of a pretty core group of players shows that they are quite unified as a team. They've got some good chemistry. You're right. They seem to be kind of determined. They haven't won the World Cup in 20 years, so I think they're quite determined this time to try and change that.
Great. Well, again, we'll have to wait and see to what extent we're right. But that brings us to the end of the mediacast, and stay tuned for. We might, as we said, publish these 26 players in a separate podcast. I myself would kind of like to go over the players just before watching a game. So I would like to have that podcast, but it depends on how much time we have to produce it.
That's right. All right. Well, thanks very much, Kevin.
Yeah, and meanwhile, keep an eye on the show notes or at soccerphiles. I got to show the final graphic here, Connor, at soccerphiles.captivate.fm, or you can search us on Google with Soccer Files. That's with a PH in the middle and an S at the end. And I'm looking forward to our next podcast.
All right. Talk to you later.
Bye-bye.